As you know, I often dedicate time toward exposing the intellectual dishonesty of bad dissertations. Lately, Chike Akua's PhD dissertation crossed my desk, and it's bottom-shelf whale shit. If you remember, Chike was Rashad Richey's Ed.D. advisor at Clark Atlanta University, and of course, Rashad describes Chike as a scholar, the scholarliest scholar in the whole scholar universe.
Dr. Chike Akua, who is a tenured professor at Clark Atlanta University, served as my dissertation chair. When they were categorizing who would be the dissertation committee chair for who, this was in the early stages, first year of the doctoral program. When I told my colleagues, when I told my fellow students that I got a guy named Dr. Akua, they said, oh, hell. Oh, no, not Dr. Akua. At that time, I did not know Dr. Akua's reputation for being a strict academic and scholar.
Yeah, about that. We are going to read Chike's dissertation and marvel at the embarrassment of it all, for this is truly wretched and proof positive that they'll hand out doctorates to just about anyone. And we'll also learn a lot about what not to do in formal writing. And right off the bat, Chike includes his CV, although I have no idea why. And I love the fact that he has already granted himself the PhD in his own dissertation. Here it says that as an RA, he investigated and practiced Afrocentric and culturally relevant instructional strategies for the Songboy Club and the Songboy Princess Club. I don't know, sounds kinda... Here are his publications, and he wasn't exactly a research machine. He contributed to 3 books authored by others and wrote 2 of his own. However, iUniverse is a self-publishing service, and Imani Enterprises is owned by, you guessed it, Chike Akua. So neither of these count, and with a graduate career that spanned 7 years, he lists only 3 presentations. I did that many in a single year. By the way, we're going to get our fill of Africa in this dissertation. There's one small problem. Old Chike looks a little on the pale side to be pounding any Zulu war drums. Your family tree doesn't look too Afrocentric to me. The abstract begins.
The purpose of this study is to examine how members of the community, educators, legislatures, and members of the academy organized and mobilized to bring Florida Statute 1003.42H into being.
If you think this sounds inconsequential, need I tell you that this statute had already been in place for over 12 years when Chike published his dissertation. 12 years! Under Acknowledgements, it says,
I also give honor to my ancestors because there's an African proverb which states, if we stand tall, it is because we stand on the shoulders of our ancestors.
First of all, this is just a bastardization of Sir Isaac Newton's famous quote about intellectualism. But I looked and I see no evidence that this quote is African. It's a stupid thing to say anyway. What if your ancestors were morons? Have you really stood tall if your great-great-grandfather was the town drunk? Or even worse, the village tax collector? And as you may guess, pretty much every old quote and adage are going to be chalked up to African origin by Chike. I guess the eagle has landed and there's a sucker born every minute are also African proverbs. I also noticed that he didn't provide any citation for the source of this proverb. I think I recall the left chastising Samantha Volnecki at the University of Oklahoma for not citing the Bible in her paper, but this is a freaking dissertation, and hers was just an informal essay. I always scan the table of contents and, yep, old Chike used a soft carriage return on the chapter appearing on page 125. Come on, don't you proofread your dissertations at Georgia State? The bibliography contains about 180 entries, but only about 25 of them are peer-reviewed sources. The rest are almost all books, and that's a problem because books are only rarely primary sources. And the quality of these books is pretty suspect. The first 2 here are published by the same dude out of this bungalow. The next one is Chike's own self-published book. This one looks okay, but this next one is published by Nympho Publications. Yeah, Nympho Publications. which is owned by, guess who? Ani Marimba, self-published. And there are a ton of essentially worthless references. I couldn't find anything on Berkeley Hill Books. And what is I Am Unlimited Publishing? Who is Akanyela Umoja? Why, he's on Akua's dissertation committee, of course. The same goes for Kristen Burrus. And we can't leave out his advisor, Joyce King. Chike made sure to get his ass kissing in. And how many of you think African Way Investments is a credible publisher? It would be interesting to see how Marx factored into his reasoning, but good luck. Although he lists Jean Annion's book, Marx in Education, in the bibliography, he never refers to her book in the dissertation. Bangura is never cited. Baruti here is actually cited, but as first name Baruti. That's right, first name Baruti.
It's because you're stupid! Stupid, stupid, stupid!
Chike defended a dissertation with such an error, and 4 people on his graduate committee couldn't spot it. Well, to be fair, such a mistake is hard to spot. But I found it. DeGraff Johnson is also never referenced. And of course he had to use Joy DeGruy's post-traumatic slave syndrome book in his dissertation, which was published by Joy DeGruy Publications, of course. Oh, did I say that he used her work in his study? My mistake, because he never cites her anywhere else. And that goes for large numbers of his bibliography entries. Delprip, for example, has 2 entries, and he never uses either of them. This padding of a bibliography usually arises from 2 motives: citing those on your advisory committee and their favorite authors, and making the bibliography look more comprehensive than it really is. I figure that about 20% of this bibliography is just junk, but it's still a step ahead above Rashad Richey's. But then again, Fun with Dick and Jane had a stronger literature base than Rashad's dissertation. So we begin with chapter 1, and Chike goes to work telling his story. The first 4 pages are all about Chike's life, and if you haven't had enough Chike in your consciousness, you'll also find a personal disclosure interview that spans 22 pages, and guess what? It's an interview of him about his life, and of course, how wonderful and caring he is. That's right, Chike gave someone a bunch of questions to ask him about himself. All of this under the guise of a personal disclosure. Hey, Chike, all you have to say is that you did not materially benefit from the results of your study, although I think you might have. For example, to figure out if you gained materially from your research, I don't need to know that Chike comes from the Igbo nation of West Africa and means power of God. This passage is an example of Chike's writing style.
The person I was speaking with explained that she was the chair of the task force. Her name was Dr. Bernadette Kelly.
Holy shit. Just say, I spoke with Bernadette Kelly, chair of the task force. This bloat permeates the entire dissertation, making it longer and duller than necessary. He taught English language arts in our public schools, but he cannot write concisely at all. This is where things get really bad. Under the role of the researcher, it says,
This study has no illusions of objectivity. As a matter of fact, it is necessarily subjective, in keeping with the tenets of the method of Afronography.
According to Chike, then, when Roland Fryer conducted his famous study on police shootings and found no correlation between them and race, he, as a black man, could have just decided to change the variables to produce the politically desired effect. That's the Afrocentric way.
As Baruti has observed, Western scientists,
White people,
argue that to be objective is to engage in unbiased, rational thinking.
Yeah, we can't have that.
To consciously operate as if there's no opinion or politics involved in the questions asked or answers gathered.
Of course, their biggest beef with science is that it's biased towards the Western way, but I thought bias was okay because humans are naturally biased. Who needs double-blind studies designed to mask the identities of the researcher and subject when you can simply say, hey, humans are biased, so no need for all that objectivity stuff?
and humans are invariably biased. Moreover, meaningful scientific questions are always dictated by the needs of the people and answered in ways that directly serve them.
In other words, if we need a strong correlation between police shootings and the race of the suspect to satisfy our political gains, then we should frame our scientific questions to produce favorable results. That's what Baruti is saying.
In this respect, science cannot help, at least in its preliminary questions, but be subjective.
At least in its preliminary questions, Chike. No one faults you for having an interest in the Florida statute because you're black. However, once you identify a preliminary question, a professional scientist, of which you are not, bends over backwards to conduct his study as objectively as reasonably possible.
For the entirety of my over 20-year career as an educator.
Here we go, more of Chike's greatness.
11 years as a public school language arts teacher, 3 years as a Title I reading specialist and reading teacher, and 10 years as a national and international educational consultant with Imani Enterprises,
his own company,
and the Teacher Transformation Institute.
Is this a dissertation or a job application?
In my own experience as a teacher, I have seen students literally go from F's to A's in my language arts class and other classes due to their immersion in African and African American history and culture and the African-centered and multicultural pedagogical methods that I and other colleagues have employed.
Sure, Jan.
That's right, everyone. F's to A's. Just by having instruction immersed in African-centered viewpoints. A kid who was basically illiterate became a champion writer in 1 year. Of course, this is his self-published book, a self-published book by a man who claims outright that he has no interest in being objective. So how do we know that you just didn't decide to give your black students A's no matter how they did? I looked up his book, and it's a hoot. Chapter 1 comprises letters of support from his students, and it goes on for 30 pages. That's right, he devoted 30 pages of his book to letters from students talking about how awesome he was. And you thought Rashad Richey had an ego problem. Actually, I think it's a self-esteem problem. This blurb is downright comical. Rather than just not including the image, we have to explain to the reader we couldn't find one. This one is just as funny.
Since I taught language arts, I found a glyph of an ancient Kemetic scribe writing and put the caption, "The art of language, writing, and literature had its genesis in Africa."
Put the caption? What does that even mean? And here's where things really go off the rails.
Afrological methodology categorizes knowledge utilizing 5 Afrocentric canons that Revere identifies,
in the Swahili language, of course,
as ukweli, truth, utulivu, justice,
and so on.
Any inquiry must satisfy these 5 canons to be legitimate as Afrocentric research.
But you violated the first one, ukweli. How can you claim to be seeking truth when you admit that you made no effort to perform your study objectively? No one on the advisory committee caught this obvious logical dilemma? Richard Feynman, who was a smarter man than Chike, or anyone Chike cites, once said that proper scientific conduct entails bending over backwards to make sure that your results are as meaningful as possible. His entire commencement address at Caltech was all about the need for objectivity, to not fool yourself. We double-blind our experiments because we don't want to fool ourselves. We can't attain 100% objectivity, but we can get pretty close, and we should always try. Chike's approach undermines everything that Feynman taught those students in the stands. I required my students to read Feynman's address, and I think every science teacher should do likewise. The page length padding in this dissertation is off the charts. Here's the document analysis data. It says,
this section provides a listing and a discussion of the documents reviewed for this study. The following documents were reviewed:
Tampa Bay Times, FAMUnews.com, the Tampa Tribune Times, Orlando Sentinel. Chike, these are newspaper articles. And he goes on,
However, all of these listed documents did not provide the data I was seeking. Below, I will discuss the documents that did provide data I was looking for that was essential to this research study.
These documents provided much of the data that I used in my study. That's all you had to say. He then includes a screen capture of a website, then proceeds to describe the menu items on the website.
The drop-down tabs on the horizontal homepage menu include in this order from left to right: Florida Black History Facts, Resources and Professional Development, Student Resources, blah, blah, blah.
Who cares?
Below this menu is a picture of educators who participated in the 2016 African American History Forest Summer Institute, standing in front of the FAMU Black Archives Research Center and Museum.
Again, who cares? And we have another screen capture.
Below the picture of the Summer Institute participants is a welcome message and a quote from Mary Bethune, who founded what would become Bethune-Cookman College in Daytona Beach, Florida.
Oh my God. Again, everybody, this is how you stretch out your prose. This is dissertation padding. But if that's not enough,
the quote reads, "We have a powerful potential in our youth.
Why are you even bothering with this?"
And then below this quote is a picture of the new National Museum of African American History and Culture.
Who cares?
The drop-down tabs on the menu begin with Florida Black History. When this tab is clicked,
no, we don't use clicked. Selected.
A list and a very brief bio of 22 Florida Black firsts.
Who cares? He literally spends pages describing what's on a website. It continues.
The next tab on the menu is Resources and Professional Development. Under this tab are...
Oh my God. I kid you not when I say that the following is an actual excerpt from Chike's dissertation.
While the website contains valuable information and is a rich resource for educators interested in African American history and the work of the task force, a careful review of the website yielded only 2 items that led me to answers for my research questions.
Yet you spent 3 pages describing each picture, quote, and menu item on it.
When one clicks on the Florida DOE tab, then clicks on the Florida statute, which is the first option, then Florida Statute 1003.42H appears on the screen. Beneath it are 2 brief video clips, one of former State Representative Rudy Bradley and former State Senator Jim Hargret, explaining the significance of the African American history legislation and why they sponsored the legislation in the Florida State House and Senate.
Okay, that was nuts. But so at least he talked us through the steps to find some important videos. But wait, regrettably, the videos are no longer active on the site, but the videos were active when I began this study.
Hi, I'm the most local person in here.
So talk us through navigating a website, which I admit I have never seen in a dissertation, and for obvious reasons, to find 2 video clips that are no longer there. Would have any of you ever seen this in anything? First, click on the menu on the left, then choose the submenu on the right, then scroll down. But don't even bother. You won't find it because it's gone. So Chike's results all came down to table 3. This is what he found. This is where the real value in Chike's research showed itself. It essentially says, 1, there were problems with the old curriculum because it wasn't Afrocentric. 2, these problems could be fixed by making some changes in the curriculum. 3, those doing the fixing needed to know how to fix it. 4, they had to convince everyone that fixing the curriculum was important. And 5, the fixing of the problem turned out to be fairly political. And of course, we had to employ an Afrocentric filter to uncover these 5 criteria. White people would never have figured this out. Whenever I hear a call for drafting curricula through a new lens, my question immediately becomes, can you show me an example of what you think should be taught? If I'm a teacher, I would like to know what I'm doing wrong and how you want me to do it. That goes for any instructional or curricular change. I've asked plenty of the multicultural education pushers, and they can never seem to answer me. And Chike never provides any examples in his dissertation. So, should they have given Chike a PhD? In my opinion, no. The whole subjectivity thing alone is real problematic. But just as importantly, he really found nothing. Identifying a logical approach to accomplishing a task, labeling each step with an African word, and pretending that only Africans perform it, then casting it as a framework is intellectually worthless. I can do this all day.
I looked at Boeing's design process from an Afrocentric lens, and based on interviews, I identified 4 steps that form the basis of Afrocentric aeronautical engineering. Kakati, they design to meet stated objectives. Banya, they incorporate the design. Undi, they test the design. Katendo, they decide which changes must be made. And I must admit that my approach is inherently subjective. The design process is really aimed at getting approval from my employer. As for safety issues, well, science is inherently subjective. You can't make planes perfectly safe. So why even bother?
Of course, this is just the familiar plan, do, check, act cycle that is employed all over the world. Do I get my PhD? Like my video and subscribe to my channel.